Whoa, loud.
Got it.
All right. Hello, everybody. It's a wonderful day here. Well, any day I get a chance to spend some time either electronically or in person with Dr. Glen Steele, Bubba, is absolutely wonderful. Today is Saturday for us, actually, Saturday, June 4. We're both in our homes, and the topic for today is we're going to be talking about the late pediatrician Arnold Gesell and the Gesell Institute. And the main reason I brought Glen in is he had some direct contact with and spent a year in a fellowship at the Gesell Institute. And one of the things that triggered this was Jeffrey Kraskin sent to me at Southern College of Optometry, sent me 6 very large, very heavy boxes that I've slowly been going through. And at one point, I'm going through, and these wonderful blue folders with articles clipped into them. And it turns out this is directly from Darrell Boyd Harmon's personal library. And there's a stack of about 45-ish articles, all written, all authored by Dr. Arnold Gesell. And I'm looking through it and I'm overwhelmed. And I know, so I gave them to Glen. Glen went through them, picked out a number of them. It's like, these have to be shared. So I put them in we've got a scan and we'll get them onto the website. But then I had our librarian, actually, Brooke at the library, because I was going to give the others away. The library didn't want. So she cataloged them and I posted that on the doc list. If somebody wants these, I'll mail them to them. The response was overwhelming. So all 45-ish of those articles have now been scanned. They've been posted to the website reinventingoptometry.com. There's a whole page dedicated to the works and contributions of Arnold Gesell. And that's our topic for today, Glen. So if you can give us a little background about your experience at the Institute and just, I know we've talked, but the overwhelming variety and breadth that Dr. Gesell, his interests were in.
Yeah, thanks, Paul, and good to be with everybody today. I had the wonderful opportunity to spend a year there at the Gesell Institute of Child Development with John Streff and Dick Apell, but in conjunction with the vision department, which we know most about, there was Dr. Louise Ames, who was a psychologist, Clyde Gillespie, who was an educator, Richard Walker, who was also a psychologist, Jackie Haynes, who was an educator. And once every Monday and every Friday, we would have a full evaluation of kids that would come in by all of those departments. Dr. Ames or Dr. Walker would do the psychological evaluation, including the Rorschach. Jackie or Clyde would do the educational aspect of it. And then Al Fors from SCO, who went with me, or I went with him, I don't know which way it was, but we went together. One of us would do Monday and the other one would do Friday, and then we'd discuss those with Streff and Apell. So it looked at this broad array in depth. Gesell, of course, was a pediatrician. First, he was a psychologist, and he got his degree in psychology. And much like the misunderstandings we have with medicine now about the things we do, he was having the same things in the very early 1900s with his psychology degree. So he went back to medical school, had an advanced entrance, and was accepted there and received his MD degree. So if you just put that part in there, you can begin to understand why he was not a traditional MD.
Right, right.
And so he incorporated many other things, and much like Skeffington, was not opposed to interchanging ideas with other professions, and then eventually began to see that vision was a tremendous influence in all of development. Now, a lot of his writings, and why I only picked certain ones in there, Paul, was so many of them. He was more focused on the very abnormal child, and going back almost 100 years now, he used the terms mentally retarded, developmentally deficient,
Right.
some of the terms that were used back then. But there's still kids that we work with today. We just have different names for them. But he saw that medicine alone, in my opinion, medicine alone could not manage all of those, and he needed all of these other things. Whereas traditional medicine was too often unwilling to step outside a boundary, as the country music song goes, to color outside the lines. I love that. I think I color outside the lines all the time.
And I don't think he saw the lines.
I don't think he saw the lines. That just if you start reading and we think, well, vision is development in infant and child was the first thing he wrote about vision. If you go back, I was doing a seminar in Torkild Rasmussen's office after their big seminar they have in Denmark. There's a one-day seminar on development and retinoscopy.
Right.
And I just happened to pull out a book entitled Developmental Diagnosis by Gesell. I'd never seen that book before.
Mm-hmm.
And I began to open it up, and there was a chapter on blindness. And when I opened it to the second page, there was just a very short sentence that just jumped out at me and blew me away. And that was, the child is born with visual hunger. And if you start thinking about that, it's his early understanding of the processes of vision involved in development that led to the book. Now, the title of the book was Developmental Diagnosis, and it was written in 1941, a full 8 years later or earlier than Visionist Development in Infant and Child. But the stage was already being set in many articles before that Harmon, that Jeffrey and Harmon cataloged.
Let me interject this in here. People who are interested, that actual chapter on blindness was one of the documents that we have.
Yeah.
I have scanned it in. It's actually on reinventingoptometry.com, and people can actually read that chapter without having to go back and buy the entire book. So
good,
absolutely wonderful.
But keep in mind, it's on blindness, and he's coming up at it from a different perspective. But he brings so much background to it in that one chapter. It's just incredible. And then he had worked some with Jerry Getman. Dick Apell came to the Institute in 1951. I did not realize it was that early, but he came in 1951, and then John Streff came in the early 60s.
Yeah.
And
I just checked, Gesell, born in 1880 and passed away in May of 1961.
61, that's right.
This says 61. At least,
yes, it was.
Maybe we need to fix his wiki page, but
no, I believe that's true. I have the book here that Jackie Haynes had written. It's entitled 60 Years of the Gesell Institute.
Yes.
And it just goes back through all of the writings and everything. Now, even though I didn't meet Arnold Gesell because he'd already passed away, my fellowship was 70 to 71, I did meet his protege, Dr. Francis Ilge, whose sister, Vivian Ilge, also happened to be an optometrist.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that.
Yeah. But Dr. Francis Ills was this larger than life, booming voice personality that that could just take over a room, take over a conversation in a good way.
Yeah.
And you understood, wow, this is somebody I need to listen to. Now, unfortunately for me also, she had just retired. But a lot like me, and I'm sure a lot like Paul, and a lot like all of us, we're going to continue to come back. So she came back to the Institute 2 or 3 times a week, just to finish up things, to meet with Dr. Ames. And they wrote a couple of books even after her retirement. So I got to interact with her. In fact, I may be the only person in the world that's ever refused to collect phone calls from Francis Ills.
Tell us about that. That's good.
She called one day. She was out of town, and she called, and everybody else had gone next door to the nursery for a going away party for somebody. I don't remember what the event was, but everybody was over there except me. I was just finishing up some paperwork. And she called and collect call from Francis Ills. Would you accept? I knew she didn't want to talk to me. So I said, no. And they hung up. But she called right back on her own dime, and she wasn't real plussed up about it. But she told me how to get around this thing about collecting, accepting the collect phone call. I knew she wanted to talk to Dr. Ames, and she wasn't there. But fun time. It was such a good group, and it's so collegial and interactive. And the interesting thing is, the academics always would default back to vision, to John Streff and Dick Apell, to make the first inroads into this child with difficulty.
And did they offer vision therapy at the Institute?
Yes. Yeah. Examination, and there was, the exam rooms were set up where there was a small room off to the side, and there was a screen there where parents would sit in. And unlike today's parents who would interrupt and disrupt, they were instructed and they obeyed.
Yeah.
They didn't disrupt anything, and it's not, just like now, it wasn't unusual for them to ask questions later and be totally surprised at the behavior and the things that their children would do. But we saw children from all over the world who would come in for that one visit and then find the processes afterwards. I got to see, even though Gesell had passed away, Al and I shared his office, and I was able to use his desk.
Wow.
And that's why you'll see in the introduction, a forward to the latest edition of Visionist Development in Infant Child from maybe 2018 or something like that, that I said it was his desk, it was his office, and how awed I was at a young age to be there and sitting at the desk of Arnold Gesell. It had a great impact on me. The entire year had a great impact on me. And I say it changed the course of my life. And there's several things that can change the course of your life. Obviously, infancy changed the course of my life. But had I not had the background at Gesell, infancy wouldn't have been a possibility for me.
Yeah.
I was going to be a contact lens practitioner whenever.
Yeah. Tell us, how did you end up? How do you end up on the path you're on and at the Gesell Institute?
Well, I fit more contact lenses than anybody in my class. And I graduated as a quarter late, so that you can apply a lot of things from that. But I got involved with the contact lens people, and I fit more than anybody in my class, and that's what I was going to do. One day, Harvey Brown, who taught BT, we didn't separate it into pediatrics and BT at the time, but but Harvey came in and he said, "How would you like to go to Gesell?" I said, "What's that?" He said, I said, "Where's that?" He said, "It's at Yale." I said, "Where's that?" The Bubba part fits. I didn't know very much about world outside of Tennessee whenever I was growing up. And he told me about it, and I said, well, let me talk to my wife. And my wife, some of you may have known Cleta, was a fourth grade school teacher,
Mhm.
and in Memphis, and we decided that would be a great opportunity. And so we went to the Gesell Institute, and as I said, it was a life-changing thing. An interesting story along with that, she interviewed for a teaching position there.
Mhm.
And 4 or 5 towns around, and one school, the Madison school where we live, said hired her, but they would only hire her to teach fifth grade. They did not want her teaching fourth grade because she was afraid. They were afraid that her accent would influence their accents.
That's hilarious.
Yeah,
But by
and
fifth grade, these kids won't
they
actually
want,
listen.
and of course
They're
that,
not changeable. Yeah.
no,
Yeah.
and of course at open house, everybody came and brought their parents over to hear her talk. But it, just so many things. The first week, our beach house wasn't ready. We stayed and lived in a beach house out at Madison,
Mhm.
and you could rent a beach house there like now for a month for the same price you can get it for a week in the summertime in the
Yeah.
peak. So it was still peak, and so we had to stay upstairs in the nursery for a week before we could actually move into our house. Traveling up there, we had it was before even what was the CB radio.
Okay.
We didn't have that, so we built notes, made notes, and would hold it up to the window. Need gas. Need to take a break. Need to go to the bathroom or whatever. But we had developed ways of communication. But it was just a wonderful, wonderful year. Some people who were first interested in the child, and then interested in maybe what they could offer. But what's the first need that the kids had? And they I'm sure very quickly, because it was already in process when I got there. But they recognized that vision was such an important part of overall development. And until you get those aspects of vision working in balance and working in a proper way, none of the other stuff is going to be very effective. And I mean, we all know that, but
yeah. I'd like to back up a little about how does even Gesell himself get in how does optometry and the Gesell Institute and all of this sort of get together? I remember hearing in a recording that Jerry Getman made about there were two different parts, because Jerry was involved in the Institute at one point. But he was also one of these recordings is about the Baltimore Myopia Project, which was going on, I think, very, very close to the end of World War II, around that time. And he talks about a chance meeting between him and Gesell down because some trains were being delayed because of troop movements coming back to the States. That I think Gesell got laid over, and he was visiting this research thing that Jerry was at, and they ended up talking. But you can tell from some of the articles written in the 30s and 1940s, he already has that orientation. But I just wondered how if you know more about the early days and how this association with us came to be.
Well, I think that you say it was a chance meeting, and that meeting itself probably was, but I think you look at Skeffington. Skeffington just didn't work in optometry.
No.
He incorporated a number of different aspects of development of things that would influence vision, working with Harmon and environment and all things like that. I think Gesell was a similar kind of person. Again, Gesell, the things that you read from him are way outside of the traditional box, and so it was wonderful to him. I think I'm putting words and thoughts in his mind, but I think it's wonderful to have an opportunity to sit down and talk with Jerry Getman, who led to Arnold Gesell, led to Ames Skeffington, who led to all the other people, and eventually led to having Dick Apell on the staff, and all of those kind of things. Because where he was before at the Yale Clinic of Child Development, those were no-nos. And it was in 1950.
And did that exist before he became the physician, or that came about the Yale Child Development thing, or was
it was? I think it was already in existence whenever he got his MD degree. He went on a fast track MD degree because of his other background.
Was that at Yale or that was somewhere else?
I think it was in Wisconsin, because he
Okay.
was born in Wisconsin. I do think so, but I'm not sure. And I think that was before he came to Yale. But again, this openness to other ideas that might affect and influence development were very powerful for him, and he was unafraid to use them. Just not afraid at all to talk with somebody who might expand his knowledge of what development is all about. And I think it was the limitation of the Yale Clinic of Child Development that caused them to Dr. Ilge and Dr. Ames use their own money to buy the building and buy the nursery next door, so they could continue his work. Because again, Ames was a psychologist, and that fit right in with Gesell, and Dr. Ilge was, she was again just this powerful woman who could understand kids. And if you ever worked with John Streff, you know how his and Jerry, their mannerisms with kids, they could pull things out of kids in front of a full room that were just amazing. And I see Gesell as the same kind of person. I don't see Skeffington as a kind of warm person that would be able to sit down in a room with a kid and pull those kinds of things out. Yeah, that doesn't take anything away from his knowledge, his integration, and ability of other professions,
and what he set off
and the things that came as a result of that. But then they're in the early 50s. That's when the Gesell Institute of Child Development was born. Mm-hmm. But it was privately funded by Dr. Ilse and Dr. Ames. And then they began to get grants, and a grant from American Optical led to the book Business Development in Infant and Child. But interestingly enough, you just reminded me of another story. They started the Gesell Institute of Child Development, and then they had several iterations of board members and changes.
Right.
And then they brought in a new executive director who was a physician, into a lot of things like that were out of the box, but had to buy a machine to, when we used to do talk about hair samples and and things that were like that, and the instrumentation to assess that was fairly expensive. And then
so people know that they were doing that to look at nutrition. The idea is if you're exposed to heavy metals or other kinds of things, your body gets rid of it in the hair, and the hair gives you a little history over the last few months, depending on the length of the hair.
What he did later on was change it to change the name, and he convinced the board to change the name to the Gesell Institute of Human Development. Well, that takes it beyond child, gives you a broader thing. But I think some of the people could see that he's getting away from the younger children,
Purely, right.
and moving towards the adults, much like I see a lot of the change in optometry today.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
When I went back to visit a few years ago, Marcy Gamudi, who was the executive director at that time, was very, very pleased to tell me that they had gone to the board and changed the name back to the Gesell Institute of Child Development, because that's where the emphasis was. When I was there, the Institute was 3 different levels: an entry level, offices of the psychologists, the staff, and everything except the greeting staff was on the upper level. And then vision was down in the lower level. It wasn't a basement or anything like that, because it had an opening to an outside backyard. And but everything, the VT room, that's where I learned to do VT in a larger room with multiple patients. It was,
and that's an important lesson for people to get, is how to be able to do that.
Yep. Oh yeah. And John could do that. Dick could do that. Very different personalities, which we'll talk about in a minute. But that was what it was. Now, when I went back, I guess it was probably 10 years ago, 2 things happened. Three things happened. One, she was very pleased to tell me the name had been changed back to the Gesell Institute of Child Development. Number 2, they had sold the building to Yale. And Yale had taken over, and I was real disappointed that there was somebody from Yale, and I don't even, may have even been a music. It wasn't child development related function, something related to music, that had Gesell's office at that point in time. The Gesell Institute of Child Development was limited to about half of the upper level. The lower level, where vision department was, used for storage. So, when John left to come to SCO, and then Dick retired, there was nobody there really to take it over. I think Phyllis Liu came in for a while. Bill Padula came in for a while, but they had their own practices and couldn't, devote full time. Couldn't give it the time.
My understanding is that at one point, most of the other aspects of the place closed. The vision was going, but I think now vision is closed, and you said there's still some educational aspects, that the institute itself is still alive, but in a much smaller, scaled down type of thing.
In a much, they teach educators. I started to say teachers. It includes more than teachers, but they teach educators how to do the Gesell developmental testing all over the country, and they bring them in, or they go to them. But the concepts of development minus vision are all there, and I think it loses some of its importance.
I remember my father actually came up to the institute for a couple of weekend courses, and I remember him coming back with the circus puzzle and the 3, 6, and 12-piece form puzzles, and the Winter Haven copy forms, and doing some evaluations with a Marsden ball, and it was very interesting to see my dad, as a general practitioner, contact lens person, getting interested in this, and it helped him personally open doors up in lots of different ways on Long Island, in the New York area.
They actually had groups come up once a month for a year.
That must
be
what he did.
He may have been part of that group.
Yes.
Because the one half of the group would come in on, I say Saturday. I don't know. We didn't work that much clinically on Saturday, but come up on Sat and have a clinical session on Saturday. Maybe it wasn't with patients, but a clinical session on Saturday. Everybody was there on Sunday for the academic, the didactic part of it, and then the other half was there on Monday for the clinical portion. And they did that once a month for a year, and got a certificate of completion after that. Whereas Al and I and the first, they would call them residents today, but that was before optometric residencies. The first one was Teresa Quiones, who was an SCO grad, and she was on the staff on and off for a while. And then there were a number of others that came through, and I think probably Phyllis Liu and Bill Padula were some of the last ones to serve in that fellowship position. But it just, I happened to be there, and in my opinion, without meeting Gesell, one of the golden years that allowed them to do that. I talked about three things. The third thing that happened whenever I went back to visit was Marcy said, oh, "Come here, can you tell me what this is?" And she had it set up on the mantle at the fireplace. And I looked at it, and it was this little thing that would hold fuel, and it was real dark and black. And then a little thing that came out the back, and then a smokestack, and then a tube on the front for projection. And I said,
You don't mind? You sent me this.
There we go. That's it.
Yeah.
That's it. Yeah, I sent it to you yesterday.
Yeah.
You can see the smokestack at the top.
Right.
And you can see the tube. It has the telescoping tube there. But if you look right in the center where the two would come back and connect, they always talked about these 2x2 slides.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm sure that's where those 2x2 slides would slide in, would come back together, and they would project them, because you couldn't project letters. There were no, in the early days, even if you had an electronic projector, they were all pre-programmed. And so they etched or drew these characters and drawings on a 2x2 slide and projected them out there for the kids, because they did retinoscopy at a close distance, an intermediate distance, and then a far distance. Not with the, what's the working distance? They literally were at far distance doing the retinoscopy. They were at that intermediate distance doing it all. And you go back and look at some of the things that Getman wrote about. Well, Gesell wrote about those too. And one of the things he said, we didn't have a way of assessing that until we discovered the retinoscope. Well, discovered use of the retinoscope, I should say.
Right.
And when we discovered use of the retinoscope, there was an uncanny timing of when they were engaged, and then when they had solved the problem, and then when they left the problem. So Gesell talked
Stop
about
thinking about it, and maybe to I'm glad you got onto retinoscopy, and one day we'll have to.
I don't like it.
No. Well, one day we'll have to do a more in-depth one. But I've seen you demonstrate this, where you're doing retinoscopy on a person, and you either give them a math problem or ask them to mentally imagine swinging a tennis racket or doing something, and you could tell when various events were occurring to the audience, and it was verified with the person, just what you saw through the retinoscope. And I was really going to ask you this. I am assuming that your interest and then ongoing learning, because the two of us still are learning all the time with the retinoscope
every day,
but it was started back in this period with, I just could imagine, with Getman and Streff, both who have different types of retinoscopy techniques named after them, Apell, who worked with this. It had to be an incredibly stimulating thing, discussing back and forth, and I assume started you on this lifelong path.
Absolutely, and that's when I began to have trust in my retinoscope, because I had a use for it now rather than just coming up with refraction. You know, and I use the vase faces picture for that.
Yeah.
And we can talk about that later in that. But yes, it absolutely started there. And I tell students, I want to see every patient, every visit, even for follow-ups, and I want to scope them. So I want no drops in before I come in, because I want to see the character, I suppose, of how they're engaging in the activity that I present.
Right.
And that to me is so much more important than refraction or numbers, or and it's why many times the prescription that I write is significantly different than what might be found on refraction, and especially on cycloplegic refraction. How do you get them engaged, and how do you get them to do things?
And you find a certain amount of lens gets them engaged, but you've refracted or whatever more, and you see as you add more, nothing is happening, and it's like, okay, let's use the least amount that gets us to this nice engagement.
Actually, I'll use an example, Paul. It was one of your patients I saw for a follow-up. You had prescribed, it was an accommodative isotrope, however we want to define that.
Right.
You had prescribed +4 with a 2 add. And I looked in and everything looked good. The student was finding a diopter more. And you say we learn every day. This is 2 years ago, I guess. I don't know. We learn every day. But I took the +4s, and he was still troping. I put the +6. He was straight. He had gotten stereopsis with that. So I said, okay, let's add one more. We added the +7. And at the +7 level, which you might have prescribed and pushed had you just looked at cycloplegia,
right,
he went into an exotropia. Now, that's not your usual case.
No.
But you got to pay attention to those kinds of things. And, you know, obviously we went back with the same prescription you had used, but whenever somebody wants to say, well, let's do the full cycloplegia. Okay, but look, what happens with that, and what changes can you get otherwise? That's one piece of data.
Yeah.
And it was just so interesting to follow up with that patient and see what had been done. And then, okay, so we try a little bit more, and oh, that's no good. I want to get back to we talked a little bit about John and Dick, and they were so opposite of personalities. I think a lot of people think Dick developed Bell retinoscopy, but it was actually John. But Dick used it more, and he talked about it more. But Dick, if you just think about personalities, John was an exotrope, Dick was an esotrope. So you can just start from there, imagining their personalities. Both of them were brilliant. Both of them could work with patients, but John's way of working with patients was a whole lot different and a whole lot more engaging than Dick's way. But that's just personality.
Yeah.
But
you got a chance to observe both, learn from both, and the Steele way is probably pieces of both pulled together.
Absolutely, and you know, to watch this really drill down everything that Dick had, and this, let's look at the broader thing that John had, and as anybody can imagine, when you have such strong personalities that are so opposite, they work well for a while, and I think that's what caused a lot of issues. Not that either one of them was at fault, but their own competing personalities began to have its way with them, and they started pulling apart, and that's when John came to SCO.
Yeah, John came to SCO, and Dick stayed on. Yeah, Dick stayed on until his actual retirement. Yeah.
until his
1951, I think you said.
yes, he came
Yeah,
on in 51
right.
and retired around 2000, I think. I'm not
I
sure.
think so. I think it was up there in years. Yeah.
Somewhere around
And
there.
he went to play golf and never turned back.
Yeah.
I asked if I could interview him. He said, "Why would you want to interview me? I'm not an optometrist anymore." And just an absolutely fascinating man.
He was so funny because playing golf, he would play golf in the snow
Yeah.
and use obviously colored balls, but weather wouldn't matter. He played his golf.
Mhm,
And
mhm.
and John would Dick could sit down and write and it would be all together. And John, I've seen him go through and trying to write a paragraph and it didn't fit. So he took the legal pad page and this is obviously before any kind of anything like Word or Word Perfect or any of the word processing things. And then he'd start it again and he'd tear that one up. I've seen a whole wastebasket full of empty paper that he's trying to get into one paragraph. But when he finally gets it and he's satisfied with it, you sit there and you say, oh my goodness, how much information is in that one paragraph?
Yeah.
But to see what he had to go through to drill down to that, because that's not the way he thinks.
Right.
He doesn't think that way. And to see him get that down into that one paragraph, and then you and I could do 3 or 4 lectures on any part of that one paragraph.
Yeah.
And it was just incredible. But it just again, it's the most incredible year that the year that we were there, Al had a motorcycle, and Al Forrest we're talking about, and we had a little party over at our beach house, and all of a sudden I looked up, and there goes Al with Louise Bates Ames on the back, giving her a motorcycle ride. First time she'd ever ridden a motorcycle. So she was a lot like Dick. You could hear her in the morning just going on her typewriter when she came in, and but she was very focused. Whereas Dr. Ilsch was just, what can we bring in from here, and and I remember going to a seminar at Yale on child development, and somebody mentioned the incomplete man in a derogatory tone, trying to push the draw a person test. Oh, she sat upright in that chair and that voice boomed out. Oh, you just didn't get anything past her.
No, that sounds great.
Just an incredible year.
Glenn, I want to thank you for these reminiscences and sharing. Obviously, the influence of Arnold Gesell and all of the people he brought together, and it sounds like just a magical place and a magical time, has led to such effect within our own profession, and I think we can say it in the other direction as well. Our profession, through the interaction with him and others, has had some profound effect in education and development, child development, human development as well. Even though they went back to the term child development.
That caused it to lose focus, I think.
Yeah.
What they had done for so many years.
But I want to thank you for sharing. I know we've got several more of these we need to do on many other topics. And thank you for sharing your Saturday. We'll share this on reinventingoptometry.com, and wonderful exchange. Thank you, Glenn.
It's been my privilege, Paul, and thank you for the opportunity.